Welcome back. I just wanted to give a quick shout out to PBA40 for leaving a review on the podcast. She said, I am so glad I found Dr. Steph. Her insights are profound yet practical. Most episodes have multiple nuggets that I can apply to my life and relationships immediately. Take a listen. She's worth your time. Thank you so much, PBA40. I really appreciate you taking the time to leave a review. It means so much. And I've mentioned this before. I just want to share a quick reminder that when you leave a review on the podcast, that tells Apple and the other podcast platforms to spread it to more people. So when you leave that review, it helps women just like you find the podcast and get the support that they need. And I've heard way too many women say, I had no idea that something like this existed. So let's spread the word and get it out there. And thank you, ladies, in advance. Now, I have a question. Have you ever felt like a failure after making a mistake? What would you think if I told you that I used to avoid making mistakes at all costs? I have a memory from graduate school when I was working on my master's. We had to read several hundred published research papers on a variety of different areas of psychology. And there's one that I will never forget. I don't remember what most of them were, but there is one that I will never forget. And it was on the value of making mistakes and that we should put ourselves out there and actually try to make mistakes. Now, this is for personal growth, which is everything. Up until that point in my life, I did everything in my power to avoid making mistakes. So reading this research paper was a shock to my system. And it was contradictory to the way that I move through the world. I avoided mistakes at all costs. And adopting the recommendations from this research changed my life. What I want you to do right now is pause for a moment and reflect. And maybe you actually hit pause on this podcast episode and you journal out the answers to these questions. I'll make sure that these go in the show notes so that you can just copy and paste them. How do you react when you make a mistake? And does that reaction help or hinder your ability to grow from it? That's the first one. Second one, how do you talk to yourself when you make a mistake? Third, to what extent do you let your mistakes negatively impact your self-worth? Number 4, what is the biggest mistake you've ever made and how did it shape who you are today? And what did it teach you? And then finally, the last one, what advice would you give to someone struggling to forgive themselves for making a mistake? What came up for you as you thought through those while I was sharing them, or maybe even journaled out the answers to those questions? If you're like most, I'm willing to bet that you've been quite hard on yourself when you've made a mistake. And maybe you've avoided making mistakes altogether, like me in the past. Don't do that anymore. But when you thought through the advice that you would give someone else, what came up for you? Likely it became clear that you would be encouraging toward them. You would probably treat them quite differently than maybe you've treated yourself. Or maybe you're well into your healing journey and you're like, oh, I can so see my old self in this. And if that's you, I hope you feel really, really proud of yourself. In what ways can you begin to treat yourself more like you would treat others when they make a mistake? And if you have resistance to that, I get it. And inside of Brave Academy, we address things just like this. I'm going to keep going here. Why do we fear making mistakes? I mean, there's lots of societal conditioning around this from school to work, and most of us are just taught to avoid them and to equate them to failure. I know you've heard things like failure is not an option. And so mentally, we're like, okay, I can't mess this up. And then it can get even more complicated with perfectionist tendencies and with fear of judgment from others that can strengthen the fear. And I'm sure you know this, but there can be an emotional impact with this shame, the self doubt, avoidance of taking risks. How does that resonate with you? But what if today you made a choice to look at mistakes differently? What if you chose to see them as opportunities? If a mistake is an opportunity, what is it an opportunity for? Well, first, to teach us what works and what doesn't. Of course, it's desirable to just know what works and what doesn't work and what steps you should take. I've been there, I get it. But action creates clarity. And through taking action and making mistakes, the clarity comes in. And I know I don't have to tell you this, but learning through trial and error is how we master skills. Second, it's to build resilience. Whenever a mistake is made, you have an opportunity to bounce back from it. You have an opportunity to not let it define you. And that strengthens your perseverance. If we think about athletes, historical figures, even those who have shifted the way that we move through the world, the way that we live, if you think about entrepreneurs, they all have something in common. They failed before achieving mastery, before the discovery, before becoming a thought leader. Third, to foster creativity. Unexpected outcomes can lead to innovation. If I just think about these Post-it notes on my desk, they were the result of a failed adhesive formula. And now, essentially, every person uses Post-its, at least in the US. Number 4, to cultivate self-compassion. Forgiveness of yourself after making mistakes builds emotional resilience, acceptance, and just knowing it's safe to be human. And as I think about my own mistakes and how I approach them now versus 15 years ago, I want to share a few ways that my thinking around this has shifted. I used to view failure as making mistakes. And now I define success as trying and learning, whether or not I make a mistake. If I try, I am successful. If I try and learn, I'm successful, regardless of if a mistake was made along the way. You get to decide how you define success and failure. You get to decide what meaning you tie to it. You get to decide. So rather than asking, why is this happening to me? How many times have you said that to yourself? I move to, what is this here to teach me? What am I supposed to learn from this? And what can I do differently next time? I firmly believe that the universe has your back, and you may think about that as God. You may say universe, you may say spirits, whatever, that, doesn't matter to me. But if you fall in line with that, you can get behind that this is here for me. This is here to teach me something. And I also look at things as an experiment. When we're doing something new, we don't know if it's going to work or not. We don't know if we're going to be able to successfully do it or not the first time, the second time, the third time, whatever it is. But what would shift for you if you looked at these things as an experiment? I'll say for myself and for my clients, when they make that shift, a lot changes for them. And they think about all the progress and all the learning, and that builds a lot of momentum for the growth that they want. Now, I want to share a recent example happened just 1 month ago. I witnessed a beautiful experience around making a mistake. I was at a business conference, and the host of the conference has been learning to play the guitar and decided that he was going to challenge himself and play the national anthem on the guitar for us. And while playing the song, he messed up. And it wasn't due to lack of practice. He practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced, and he knew it. But he got going and he messed up. And when he did, he just kept going. And I personally, I didn't think twice about it. Well, later, he shared with us how embarrassed he felt when he messed up the song. And he elaborated about some of the negative self talk that came up. I want you to pause and think for a moment. Would you have felt that way if you were in that kind of situation? How would you have felt? Would you have even allowed yourself to put yourself out there in a situation where you might make a mistake? Or up to this point, have you avoided situations like that? When he brought up these feelings of inadequacy, he received the most beautiful feedback from us, which this is a side note, but this is a lesson in openness. Openness is the grand simplifier. He could have let this eat him alive. He could have let this weigh on him. He could have let it negatively impact, like how his belief in himself around playing the guitar and things like this. But instead, he shared it and let us respond genuinely and then believed us. Okay, so when he brought it up, person after person after person said it was their favorite part of that day, that his mistake inspired them and that it actually allowed them to give themselves more grace to make mistakes and to try things that they have not yet tried because they were avoiding making a mistake. The host of this conference is an incredibly successful individual. So I want to remind you that even the most successful people make mistakes. It's not like, oh, well, once I get to this point, I'll feel more confident and I won't make mistakes. I know that, that's true, but sometimes it's good to get the reminder. What may feel like an awful experience for you, like this host of the conference, may be the very thing that changes the lives of others and that has the potential to change the way that you see yourself and the way that you view mistakes. In what ways have you been holding yourself back? Making mistakes shows that you're trying, you're learning, and you're growing. I want you to reflect on a recent mistake and reflect on what you learned from it and what mental shifts you need to make to see it as what it actually is, a valuable learning experience. Don't let fear of making mistakes hold you back. Lean into them, learn from them, and trust that they are guiding you toward growth.